Chapter 5. Hey Mama. My mama told me to go to school, get your doctorate, but still supported me when I did the opposite. Kanye West. Hey Mama. Late registration. The first time I actually saw the term Mama's Boy connected to Kanye was in a Chicago newspaper in 2005. It was in the headline of a cover story for the entertainment section. The headline read, Kanye, a Mama's Boy after all. I didn't like the reference at first, but the actual story was quite glowing. I was very proud of it, and so was Kanye. When he was asked about me in an interview, he said, my mama's my best friend. I talk to her every day. It's no secret that Kanye and I are really, really close and always have been. I have accompanied him to award shows, been his general manager, and now I'm the CEO of his parent company, Supergood, as well as the chair of the Kanye West Foundation. If asked before the article appeared to define the phrase mama's boy, I probably would have said it was a pejorative, a description of a male child who was too tied to his mama and who'd never quite come into his own. But that was a connotative meaning that was totally and ultimately inaccurate. Now I think of the phrase in a very positive way. That you're a mama's boy doesn't mean that you're not a man. Kanye is very much his own man. I recall him saying in an interview, I'm not tough, but I am strong. He can love his mother and still be a strong man. I really don't ever remember that mama's boy moniker being a problem with Kanye when he was growing up, and I was always very involved in his life. I worked in one of his daycare centers, and later I was always volunteering at his school. Whether it was attending a PTA meeting, chaperoning kids on a field trip, or editing the parent teacher newsletter, I was always there. It never seemed to bother him. I was supportive and I believe he appreciated. It was a source of comfort knowing that I would always be there. I remember one time when he was just a toddler, I had to work a long stretch at the school. I was teaching at Morris Brown College in Atlanta, Georgia, then, and had to do some advising after a full day of classes. This was at the time when we definitely needed extra money. It was a necessity, not a luxury, and I just couldn't afford not to make that extra money advising for a couple of weeks. I dropped Kanye off at about 7 in the morning and didn't pick him up until 10 that evening. Boy, was he mad at me. He had his little arms folded and wouldn't say a word. We can get some ice cream, I said as we were driving home. I was feeling really badly and trying to bribe him into forgiving me. Kanye wasn't having it, though. He turned his head toward the window away from me and continued to sulk. I tried everything I could to win his favor, but to no avail. Finally, I became a little frustrated and said, well, just forget you then. Instantly, he unfolded those little arms and burst into laughter. I was stunned that a baby, he was scarcely more than a year old, could hold his own like that. I could not believe he was so focused and so determined not to give in. Never had I met a kid who could not be snapped out of his mood with an offer of an ice cream cone. Not Kanye. He felt that I had abandoned him, and he wanted me to know it. I think he wanted to pay me back, and he surely did. I was a little taken aback by the whole ordeal, but I was more relieved than anything that he had finally forgiven me. I always hated the thought of disappointing any child in any way. That time it couldn't be helped though, and I was as sad as he was. Except for punishing him when he needed to be punished, I don't think I ever disappointed him ever again after that. Like the song says, Kanye was just 3 years old when he and I moved to the Shy. I'd gone to Chicago a month before I went back to Atlanta to get him from his dad. I needed to find a place that would be affordable, safe, and ideal for a single parent raising a young boy in Chicago. That was not the easiest task, partly because of my limited budget and my limitless taste, and partly because in the nicer places, children were not always welcome. I persisted, though, and found a wonderful place near Chicago State University where I'd already begun teaching, and also near Professional Playhouse Daycare where I'd enrolled Kanye in school. The landlord's a very nice lady and her husband, had at first turned me down. They explained that while they loved children, they felt that having one in their three-flat building would attract other children and that the yard would always be full of them. They themselves occupied the first floor, and another single lady without any children lived on the second. I loved the place the moment I looked at it and thought it to be just perfect for Kanye and me. So I insisted that having Kanye there would not attract a single kid. After all, he was just 3 years old, and I had no intention of letting him go out to play without me. Still, they turned me down. How glad I was when they called back to tell me I could have the apartment. The tenant they had chosen had not worked out for some reason, so they called Chicago State to verify my employment and ended up being rather impressed with me. They complimented me on having just earned a doctorate degree and on becoming an instructor at the neighborhood university. They said they wanted smart people in their building and that if we still wanted it, the apartment was ours. Within 1 week, we moved in. Kanye had his own room, and there was a living room, large dining room, full kitchen, and an enclosed back porch. My room was right next to his, and we both felt very comfortable in our new home. It was a godsend, just like the job, just like Larry Lewis, the man who'd been the catalyst for our moving from Atlanta, and just like Chicago itself, a city I'd vowed never to live in, but came to embrace it as my favorite city in the world. I loved working at Chicago State, and I think Kanye was proud of me even then. It was a new start for us, and we both were very happy. In 1 year, I purchased a home for us in South Shore. Mama would rent no more, and Kanye would have his own backyard. He was a little older, and kids could come over if they wanted to. I didn't know it, but South Shore, and especially South Shore Drive, where we lived, was considered the shit, a prestigious area in a coveted part of town. We were within walking distance of Lake Michigan, and our backyard backed up to Rainbow Park. It's in the kitchen of that house that Kanye talks about kneeling on the kitchen floor and saying, "Mama, I'm going to love you till you don't hurt no more." He had seen me fall in love only to be disappointed and had never forgotten, even up to the day he wrote, "Hey Mama." Lots happened in those 8 years we lived on South Shore Drive. I enrolled Kanye in preschool at Chicago State University. Nothing was wrong with Professional Playhouse where he started when we first left Atlanta. But since I was teaching at CSU and had waited for a year for the preschool there to prove itself worthy, it was a brand new, and I preferred to wait until its second year of operation for them to work out their kinks. I decided to take Kanye out of Professional Playhouse and enroll him in the school on the campus where I taught. It would be a little more convenient for me, and I could check on him throughout the day. It turned out to be an excellent school where the director and teachers were caring and nurturing, one where children learned something new every day, and all the parents were required to be actively involved. In no time, Kanye was ready to enroll in kindergarten. His teachers told me that academically he was fine, even gifted, but socially they thought he needed some help. They told me Kanye did not work well with others, that he was self centered and needed another year there to adjust to public school. There was a kindergarten at the preschool, and for about half a second I considered whether I would take their advice. The answer came quickly, though. When I debated leaving him there at nearly $300 a month or finding a good public school and seeing to it that he worked well with others, I chose the latter. The money wasn't the major factor, although it was a factor. I was confident that Kanye would do just fine in regular kindergarten. I checked out Powell School on South Shore Drive. All the kids in the neighborhood were going there, and it was only 4 blocks down the street. Named for Adam Clayton Powell, someone who I'd long admired, it did not quite measure up to the standards I had in mind for the school Kanye would attend. Kindergarten would be his entry into real school, and like many of the mothers I had met at his preschool, I was hell bent on making sure he'd get into one of the best schools in the city. For a minute, I considered a school in Lincoln Park. It was near North. It was in near North and quite a distance from the house. There would be no way for him to get there except my taking him. That was secondary, though. because the school sounded so great. The curriculum allowed for applied teaching and hands on learning. I knew the value of both. I was impressed with the activities and the many field excursions the kids were afforded. But what I did not like, besides the long drive on icy winter mornings, was that there were no other black kids at the school. While I applauded diversity, I did not want Kanye to be the only diverse kid there. So I continued my search for another school. Just in the nick of time, another mother of one of the preschoolers, Beverly, told me about Vanderpool Magnet School. She told me it was excellent and known for teaching the arts. After talking with her and visiting the school, I was sold. Mr. Olson, the principal, Miss Wooten, the vice principal, and Miss Morgan, the music teacher, all stood out to me as the kinds of educators I wanted to influence Kanye. So did Miss Murray, the kindergarten teacher, who was also patient and kind. Our only problem was that we missed the deadline for applying. Here is where I knew I'd have to do a little handiwork and call on someone I knew at the Board of Ed for a favor. One more problem. I was fairly new to the city and really didn't know many people, nor was I due any favors. But I figured I was young, gifted, black, degreed, and a professor of English at Chicago State University. Surely there would be a way to get some consideration. We'd only missed the deadline by a couple of days, and the school still had a couple of spaces. Mama strikes again. I'd get Kanye in that school or bust. I asked the provost at my university to help me, and I suppose he did. I don't really know what happened. I just know that within a couple of days of visiting the school, Kanye was invited to apply. In those days, kids weren't selected to attend magnet schools by lottery, as they would be in subsequent years. A battery of tests were given, and fortunately, Kanye did well on them all. I couldn't help but be amused when they asked him to draw a man. Kanye told me he'd draw a football player, but they told him he couldn't do that. They wanted him simply to draw a man. I learned later that there was a scoring system based on the detail included, and I guess the test did not allow for a picture of a football player. Kanye said he'd draw a man, but he was going to put him in a football suit. They just looked at one another and said, okay. Kanye drew his football player and passed the test in flying colors. My baby was in Vanderpool, and there he would stay until he graduated from 8th grade. It was during those times that I worked late nights just to keep on the lights, and I got him training wheels so he could keep on his bike. I would give anything in this world, Michael Jackson leather and glove, but didn't give him a curl. Not everything was perfect during those years, and although Kanye was a good kid, he got into his share of devilment. I'll never forget the day he took the X rated magazine to school. He was passing it around for the other boys to see, and the teacher caught him. I've never been so embarrassed as the day I had to go to school and face Miss Wooten. She was so tough. She was so tough that I was almost afraid of her. Look what Kanye brought to school, she said, showing me the magazine. I wanted to crawl through any hole in the floor. And if his taking it to school wasn't bad enough, she told me that when she asked him where he'd gotten the magazine, he said, from my mother's closet. I could have killed him. I didn't know what to say. And to this day, I don't know what I did say. Everything seemed somewhat of a blur after that, until I had Kanye in the car and proceeded to yell at him like I'd never done before. Before I knew it, I'd lost my temper and smacked him across the face. The bad thing about that is that I wasn't even sorry for it. I dared him to ever do such a thing again. And I think it took me hours, if not days, to cool down. That wasn't the last time Kanye would get caught with his pants down, at least figuratively speaking. He had graduated from Vanderpool and gone on to Polaris High. I decided to borrow his VCR to look at a movie because the one in our room, Scotty's and mine, was on the blink. To my surprise and utter dismay, Kanye had an X rated tape in it that, in my opinion, was too graphic for the most mature adult, much less a 14-year-old boy. It was triple X rated, and I was mad as hell about it. He'd gotten it from one of the boys at school, and it seems they had been taking turns watching it. I was so angry that I didn't say a word for 2 days. I couldn't because I didn't know what to say or what to do. I did take the tape out so that he'd sweat a little, or hopefully a lot, wondering what happened to it. When I regained my composure, I confronted him. By this time, I had already decided what the consequences would be. I knew that ranting and raving would not deter his behavior. I knew that making him promise never to watch such a thing again would only make him lie to me. So, what could I do that might have some positive impact? What could I say that might result in something productive? I wanted to be the mama of mamas, and yet, in this situation, I found myself speechless. In that 2 days of not mentioning a word to Kanye, it came to me that what I should do. Calmly, I approached him with the tape in my hand and said, "What is this?" It was the moment he'd been dreading, I'm sure, and the moment I'd begun to anticipate. To my surprise, he said quite openly, "It's a tape I got from Johnny," not his real name. "What were you doing with it in your VCR?" I asked him. With his head down, he told me he'd been watching it. I don't know what I expected him to say. I don't always raised him to tell the truth, and somehow I wished then that he thought of a lie I could believe. Of course, I knew he'd been watching it. Why else would it have been there? Thankfully, I had taken a moment to reflect on the whole matter and to ask for guidance in confronting him. The direction had come, and to this day, I know it was better to have done what I did than to have ranted and raved and forbidden his actions. I asked him if he thought it was healthy for a young teenage boy to look at X rated movies. I continued with a series of other related questions. I was surprised by the maturity of some of his answers and annoyed by the flipness of others. In the end, however, I required him to do a full blown research paper, complete with footnotes and bibliography. I gave him 3 topics to choose from, but I only remember the topic he chose: the impact of watching X rated movies on a teenage boy. Until he finished that paper to my satisfaction, there was to be no television, no going to play basketball, no friends over, or any other activity. Needless to say, he worked on the paper consistently and finished a decent paper in a pretty short time. I corrected it as though he were in one of my college classes, allowing no misspellings and requiring correct documentation. I don't believe it deterred an affinity for such videos, but I do know he learned quite a bit about how to do a research paper, and I thought that in itself to be a very valuable lesson. In Kanye's earlier years, I had friends and quite a few relatives who thought I was too permissive with Kanye. They felt I didn't discipline him enough, that I allowed him to do and say things that he shouldn't. I never believed you should stifle children and beat them into submission for the sake of your ease and comfort. I always wanted my son to feel free to express himself. Of course, there needed to be boundaries, and I was always pleased to know that if I told Kanye I didn't like something, he would fix it. I always wanted him to be his own person, not some cookie cut out of me or his dad. I didn't put many restrictions on Kanye. He used to call my sister Claye instead of Aunt Claye. I didn't have a problem with it because that's what I called her. I guess being the youngest and having nieces and nephews close to my age and having them sometimes call me by my first name instead of Aunt Donda made it cool. But some family and friends did not seem to like that at all. After all, in a traditional black family, there are these rules. You have to call people Miss, whatever their name is. You can use either the first name or last name, but if she is an elder, you have to call her Miss Jones or Miss May. And for men, it's Mr. Smith or Mr. Paul. You can't call older people by their first name. It's a show of disrespect. And I understand that. I may not agree with it, but that's the way it is. So I had to talk to Kanye about that. We live in a world with people, and you can't always do things your way just because you feel it's right. You have to be considerate of how other people see things too. Kanye did things like that, not to be disrespectful, but because he couldn't see why it had to be done the way everyone else did it. It was part of his wanting to stand out, but sometimes he would get beside himself. He'd be a little more grown than even I, the permissive one, would allow. We'd moved to Chicago during the summer, but before our move, uh, I'd visited on a couple of occasions to interview for jobs and get acclimated to the city. On one of those visits, I'd made new friends. One of them was Linda Pruitt, whose name is Jahan Rashid today. I met her through Larry Lewis, the guy I met at the Cool Jazz Festival in Atlanta and who was responsible for me being in Chicago. His best friend Frank was either going with or married to Linda. I don't remember which now. Instantly, she and I hit it off and became best friends. It would be a while before Linda spent any real time around Kanye. She'd just seen him briefly here and there. He was very young then and very likely did not remember her at all. One summer, after Kanye had just come home to Chicago after spending the summer with his dad, Linda came over for a visit. Kanye ran to the door, opened it, saw Linda, and said, "Who are you?" Not hello, not may I help you? Just, who are you? He couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Linda was not amused. "Boy, I'm your mother's best friend," she said. "You better get out of the way and let me in this house." I didn't know until years later, actually after Kanye had made it, that she remembered that day well. She confessed, "I'm going to tell you, I thought Kanye was a spoiled, snot-nosed kid who would grow up to be trouble." She never told me that then, but had I heard him speak to her in that manner, I would have put him in his place. Looking back, I could understand why she thought as she did. But back then, I couldn't see it. I guess I was totally blinded. I thought just about everything he did was brilliant and wonderful. I guess he was very much my boy, Mama's boy. What was wrong to others was not always wrong to me. I appreciated that Kanye saw things differently. He never thought inside of the box. He began to draw when he was 3 years old, and I bought him a huge box of Crayolas. You know, the one with the sharpener in the back. I think it was a box of 64. Even then, his talent stood out. He drew things that kids who were twice his age couldn't draw. He drew people, real people, not stick people. I was impressed by it. I remember having a conversation with him about colors and how a banana is supposed to be yellow and an orange should be orange, but he rarely made things the right color, not unless he wanted to. He would make the banana purple and the orange blue. I didn't tell him it was wrong. That was the way he wanted to see it. He knew that a banana was actually yellow, but he wanted to make it purple, and I didn't argue with him. When he was 6, my sister and brother-in-law took him to a lake. There were ducks there just quacking away. Kanye took exception to the way the ducks were quacking. "That's not the way that's supposed to sound," he said, and started quacking the way he thought it should be. Now, these were real ducks quacking, and he felt like they were doing it wrong. In his mind, it should have sounded a different way. He was adamant that the ducks were quacking wrong. Kanye had a distinct perspective. He always had his own spin on things. I never criticized him for it. I figured I would just nurture the creativity. Why does a banana have to be yellow? Maybe the ducks were quacking wrong. I never thought when he grew up that he would be looking for a purple banana. It's ironic he'd be considered a mama's boy when he was so independent of me. All kids need their mothers, and there is a huge amount of dependence that most will never even acknowledge. Whether or not he depended on me openly, I just wanted Kanye to know that I loved him unconditionally and that it was critically important for him to display respect for himself and others. Respect has always been a big thing in our house. Not just being respected, but learning how to respect. And because Kanye has a high regard for me, it makes him a better man. He has never denied being a mama's boy. And even in the tough world of rap, that respect he has for me shines through in the way those around Kanye treat me. And I appreciate that. Whether it's Jay-Z or Ludacris, or Nelly or John Legend, or Common, or Don C., Kanye's road manager, G, his manager, Ibn, his barber, or any of his many friends, they all walk in with so much respect. And I know it's because of how Kanye treats me. I don't know how they act around others. I suspect they display that same level of respect. In fact, I know they do because I know some of their mothers. But Kanye has set the tone for how I should be treated, and it's always with utmost respect. When he was younger and he'd play one of his songs for me, he'd always turn down the volume on any part with profanity. Now, I knew Kanye cursed, and not all the words in his music were from his Sunday school class, but I liked that he felt it appropriate to spare me from some of the lyrics. It was all about respect. Now that I've become a true hip hop mom and Kanye is well beyond his teen years, he knows I don't mind hearing all the lyrics and that, in fact, I prefer to. There is no need to turn the volume down. The respect remains, and I know it. That children should have respect for themselves and for their parents is a given. It's something that I required of Kanye and that my parents required of me. Yet, frequently, that's not how it is. Some may say it's phony to avoid certain behaviors in front of a parent or vice versa. But I've always believed that it's the right thing to do. Admittedly, some things become age appropriate, like Kanye not needing to edit for me the profanity in his music. But other behavior may or may not be appropriate. What one does with one's peers is not necessarily the respectful thing to do in all situations. I know Kanye has intuited this, and I've never spoken on it to him. I never had to. Some things are taught by setting an example. The whole respect thing is declining. Permissive as I was when Kanye was a child, and cool as I fancy myself now that he's an adult, he has never disrespected me. I'm concerned that across the board, however, that may be the exception rather than the rule. What greater evidence is there than the way some children treat and act around their parents? It's not necessary to watch Jerry Springer or other such shows to know that this is true. We need but look around us. Disrespect is running rampant, and it didn't start yesterday. I remember when I was in graduate school, my roommate, an undergraduate, was growing impatient about something. I heard her say, not even under her breath, "I wish that bitch would come on." "Who are you talking about?" I asked her, and without hesitation she replied, "My mother." Now I could never imagine thinking about referring to my mother as a bitch, much less actually doing it. It would never enter my mind, no matter what the situation. But in some households, it is commonplace, a phenomenon that to me is as disturbing as it is damaging. If you can even fix your lips to call your mother a bitch, even if she is one, you're not only disrespecting her, you're also disrespecting yourself. But many kids don't know any better because parents aren't stepping up and teaching them better. Not long ago, one of my little twin nephews came to visit his grandmother. They haven't spent much time with with our side of the family. But of course, we love them dearly. At 5 years old, they are the cutest little boys you'll ever see. Hollywood cute. They are also sweet and well behaved. Nevertheless, there was some music playing that I guess one of the twins didn't like. He said, "Can you turn that damn thing down? It's annoying me." Everyone in the room just stopped. We come from one of those families where that just wasn't allowed. When we were coming up, if an adult was in the room and wanted to curse, he or she had to spell it out or use pig Latin. But my little nephews hadn't a clue that to use the word damn at age 5 was not going on. Not even I would allow such language raising Kanye. Not to my face or anywhere within earshot. Justin, we don't talk like that, my niece said to him in a calm voice. She didn't go off on him and scream and yell. He looked up and said, "Oh, okay." It didn't dawn on him that it was inappropriate for him to say that. He was never taught that, but he learned that night. There are some old fashioned values I insisted on that could serve us well today. People talk about back to basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but there are some basic values we must return to as well, not the least of which is respect. Honesty, integrity, and a strong work ethic were traits I knew I had to be instilled in Kanye. He wasn't going to learn them through osmosis. And if I, his dad, his grandparents, aunts, uncles, and any adult he was allowed to be around did not teach him, the streets and impolite TV certainly weren't going to. It's not rocket science to conclude that we spend too much time and money on things that aren't as important as teaching our kids the basics. We build space stations on the moon and neglect the fundamentals. As Kanye was growing up, and now as well, of course, people actually took the lives of other human beings daily and thought nothing of it. Now, decades later, there isn't a night that goes by that someone isn't killed or injured because someone dissed them. We have come so far, and our ancestors have sacrificed so much. If we fail to keep our children mindful of this, disrespect will continue to run rampant. When Kanye was very young, I began teaching him to love himself. It's something I felt I must consciously do. The low self esteem he was bound to take on if he looked to the media for validation would only serve to cripple him and make him question himself into oblivion. As a black man, and a man period, he would need to be strong. This would not happen if he learned to hate rather than to love himself. And in a society where our legacy is surely the love of our forefathers, but also the hate of the slave master, it is imperative that parents consciously teach the love of self, the courage of Malcolm, the wisdom of Martin, the tenacity of Marcus. I believe that unless combated, self hate is easy to develop and nearly impossible to shed. One of the best ways to teach a child to love himself and others is to love that child with all of your might. Perhaps it is the only way. If you don't know that you are loved, how can you possibly have a conscience? How can you care about another person? It's so basic, yet we almost miss it. But if you know you are loved and are taught to love by those who raise and nurture you, you have what's fundamental to a well adjusted and happy life. I spent a few days in Spain in 2006, and I met a guy there who grew up with very little. Economically, he was deprived as a child and didn't always know how he was going to survive from day to day. Today, he is highly successful financially and otherwise. I asked him what made the difference for him. Unconditional love, he told me. His daddy left when he was 5 months old, but his mother was right there. No matter what they lacked or whether they were able to eat on a given day, he knew his mother loved him every single moment of his life. For him, her loving him unconditionally made all the difference. I would say that anyone who grows up to be a reasonably well adjusted, fulfilled individual has to have had someone there, a mother, a father, a teacher, a pastor, a friend, or other family member who really loved him and made it known. If you don't get that, you can't grow up feeling good inside, even if you defy the odds and become successful. If you get too much love, maybe you'll be called a mama's boy. But that isn't the worst thing in the world, is it?